Hola a todos, muchas gracias por asistir. Este es nuestro segundo podcast de Cognitive English. Se llama Cognitive Ideas, Ideas en Spanglish. Estoy acá junto a Jordan.
Hello, everyone.
Yo soy Joaquín y estamos aquí. Hoy día vamos a hablar sobre un tema que quedó quizás colgando la vez anterior respecto de la educación. La vez anterior mencionaba de que ahí en Chile se da como una beca a los puntajes sobre 700 que ponderen entre todas las PSU, que es la prueba de selección universitaria.
Sobre 700 de cuánto? ¿Cuánto es el máximo?
Máximo es 850.
Ok.
En mis tiempos, la prueba de selección universitaria, por cada 4 malas te descontaba una buena. Entonces tenías que ser súper selectivo con qué respondías porque posiblemente te podían bajar puntaje. Hoy en día creo que eso ya lo eliminaron. Yo creo que tiene pros y contras, quizás porque de repente podéis tirar alguna a la chunte. Eso es algo muy, muy chileno. Así que...
¿Y 700 es como un buen puntaje o cuál es el contexto de 700?
La distribución de los puntajes se ve como en una campana de Gauss. El promedio en general son 500 y algo. De hecho, ya 500 y algo te da como acceso a casi cualquier carrera en otras universidades. En universidades tradicionales, en general es sobre 650 hacia arriba. Okay. 700 ya es que te fue bien. Así, dato freak, a mí yo ponderé para entrar a la universidad, ponderé 700. Y yo fui como de las primeras generaciones a las que le afectó el ranking de notas. El ranking de notas, en base a tu promedio durante la enseñanza media, te daban un puntaje. Que ese puntaje fue menos que mi puntaje de matemáticas. Es decir, donde implementaron este ranking, me quitaron un porcentaje que me otorgaba la prueba de matemática para meter el ranking ahí. Entonces yo salí como perjudicado en ese aspecto. Quizás pude haber ponderado un poco más.
I'm crying for you, Joaquín.
Ahí.
the world's smallest violin.
Tal cual. Entonces, claro, porque yo en matemáticas me fue súper bien, creo. Yo ponderé 700, no, en matemáticas saqué como 750 y algo. Que eso es buena nota. Igual yo estaba súper relajado cuando di la PSU, porque en un principio quizás no quería entrar a la universidad al tiro, pero ya pasó. Water under the bridge.
And do they give you, if you get over a certain score, do they tend to give you scholarships in universities? And do they give academic scholarships here in Chile? I actually don't know.
Sí, acá en Chile, bueno, por situación socioeconómica no calzo en las becas que se otorgan, pero por notas podría haber postulado algunas. Pero también universidades te dan beneficios por tener buenas notas. Por ejemplo, antes de que dieran los puntajes, cuando te va bien, generalmente te llaman antes. Entonces me acuerdo que me habían llamado de la Universidad del Desarrollo diciéndome que podía estudiar cualquier carrera gratis. Pero esa
como you wouldn't have to pay anything the entire career.
Claro.
Wow.
Pero no era mi universidad, la universidad que quería.
Okay.
Yo siempre, donde como que fui de un entorno como más matemático, para mí solamente existía la Universidad Técnica Federico Santa María, no existía otra. Para mí era esa.
Okay. And in the United States, they separate the scholarships by academic scholarships and need-based scholarships.
Okay.
So, for example, somebody could be, could not necessarily have outstanding grades, but have enough to get into the school, but socioeconomically would be a challenge to pay for the school. And so they could receive a need-based scholarship. And then somebody who perhaps can pay for it and it wouldn't be a challenge, and has really outstanding academic performance in high school. They could give that person an academic scholarship, and those scholarships could be, I think they could be quarter of your total payment, half, or a full scholarship.
I know
also,
that,
there are athletic scholarships as well.
I think here in Chile we don't have that. I know that I seen on movies. I don't know, that's not the best reference, but they have to write an essay to get accepted to universities. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it depends on the university, and there are different applications, different types of applications, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
For example, a famous application is from the University of Chicago. I think it's the University of Chicago or Carnegie Mellon, one of those two. And they ask you really wacky, strange questions.
Like what?
Usually they just ask you, tell me about you, right? And then you spend X number of words, like 3/4 of a page, and you write about, this is the story of me. That's generally the question they ask you. There's almost always an essay. But in University of Chicago or Carnegie Mellon, maybe both, they ask you questions like, I remember one question was, if imagine you've written your autobiography, please, and ripped out page number 137. What would page 137 be? Right? And like, so you have to write it as if it were like, as if there were a page before it. So you have to like write a word in the beginning, and you have to finish it at the end. So it's taking out page 137 of your autobiography. But the big difference I don't know Chilean applications extraordinarily well, but I gather that the big difference in admissions is that in the United States, the universities, particularly the best universities, tend to, or the most prestigious ones, tend to look at you as a candidate in a very holistic way. So they don't just want to see your grades, and your SAT score obviously are important, but they're also very interested in, did you volunteer? What was the quality of your volunteer experience? Did you if you're applying for a business career, did you ever start a startup? Have you ever created a business? What was your experience there? They do interviews with alumni and with the admissions staff, and those interviews count. They do they have several essays sometimes, and so there's a percentage for each one, and that percentage changes with each university. But here, I think here in Chile, it is basically your PSU. And then everything else is really, it's like 99% PSU, and then maybe the 1%, a couple of other things.
Yeah, in fact, when you go through Enseñanza Media, you have to, your only job is to get good grades. So you, así no tienes como ninguna traba al momento de, no sé, tener este ranking, qué sé yo. Pero cuando das la PSU, you have to, I don't know, get a really good grade so you can hopefully get into the university that you like. Here in Chile, there's a, I don't know if you know about preuniversitarios.
Yeah, I do. I don't know a lot about it, but I know of it.
Yeah, yo estuve en un preuniversitario, quizás no en estos podcasts quizás no es bueno nombrarlos, pero en el fondo era clases, en el fondo te preparaban para una prueba, que era la misma materia del colegio.
Great.
Bueno, tampoco yo no fui en un gran colegio ni nada, pero en el...
But focused on test prep. It's
claro,
focused
eso,
on...
Sí, solo enfocarte en la prueba. Lo que sí, uno les daba como una PSU antes de entrar, donde te miden. Entonces, yo me acuerdo que por mi nivel de matemáticas me dijeron, oye, también tú puedes entrar a matemática avanzada. En realidad era más ejercicios de matemática para la PSU, no me preparaban nada. De hecho, la profe era una estudiante de la universidad donde yo entré. Entonces, eso era principalmente, y te preparan solamente para la prueba. Y durante el colegio, al menos en el mío, que como dije, no fue en un gran colegio, la preparación de decir, ok, ¿qué te gusta? Saber para dónde vas, es decir, cuáles son tus habilidades y todo eso, es súper, súper, súper débil. Es decir, que nos hicieron un par de pruebas de personalidad y ya, ok, mira, tú como que en algo donde, al menos a mí, algo como más como quizás matemática, puede ser como, no sé, hasta arquitectura, pero como que no era algo como que me llamaba tampoco. Lo que sí tuve la suerte es que, al menos en mi casa, mis viejos siempre me inculcaron como, oye, entra a estudiar lo que te acomode, pero entra a estudiar. Entra a estudiar algo que te acomode y en el fondo trata de verlo tú, ¿sí? No te vamos a obligar a, no, es que tenéis que ser doctor y nada de eso, que quizás de repente sí se da. Por ejemplo, no sé, me imagino que en familias donde todos son abogados o doctores hay como cierto prestigio detrás, entonces el individuo quiere también ser eso. Entonces,
there are a lot of incentives and pressures on that person to eventually just follow the same path. Also, I think maybe biologically that apparently a lot of our personality is set before we even enter this world. And so it may have just been kind of predetermined biologically, evolutionarily, that this person was going to become a doctor.
Sure.
And it could be just because they're very, they're like very high in empathy and very high in the personality trait conscientiousness.
Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, so I'm talking about the big 5 personality traits.
The Ocean test.
The Ocean test measures the big 5 personality traits. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about the big 5 personality traits is actually that it is the only personality test that exists where there is where there's real evidence that it's predictive of behavior. Right. For example, a lot of people, it's very in fashion to try I can't remember the exact name of the test, but like it's where you see if you're like an INTJ or an ENF. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Right. And it's very popular, but apparently there's actually no evidence whatsoever that it actually is an effective test. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary. So, but the big 5 is actually the only one that's actually predictive of behavior in people. And so it's actually very useful for employers. It's very useful for anywhere where it's important to know what personality is. And the reason it would be important is because actually there are 5 personality traits, but one of them is highly correlative to success, or to workplace success.
What would be that one?
That one is called conscientiousness, and there's not really a word for that in Spanish. It's basically, it's a little bit like meticulosidad, and also industriousness, or like ingeniosidad, and like la definición en español sería como que alguien muy alto en conscientiousness es alguien que está muy ordenado, le gusta la estructura, se esfuerza mucho en proyectos, y le gustan las cosas como predecibles, no tanto impredecible. That's like the personality trait of
one.
Sure, and we could talk about this also, but it actually very strongly correlates politically, these personality traits. So it tends to be that someone who's very high in conscientiousness tends to be on the political right, whereas somebody, there's another trait called openness, and somebody who's very high in openness tends statistically to be on the political left. However, there are many people who are open on the right, and there are many people who are very who are high in conscientiousness on the left. But statistically, those tend to be the tendencies.
I think that's where the political compass comes in, where you have left and right, and you also have authoritarian and libertarian, right?
It tracks onto the personality score, but I've never seen a graph that uses the personality points. I've seen libertarian, authoritarian, mm-hmm. and then kind of economic left, economic right. or socialism, capitalism, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the five are just conscientiousness, openness, agreeableness. So we have ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And then each one has an opposite. Openness, the opposite of that, actually don't know all the names, but I think it's like being closed.
I think I have it right here.
Awesome.
We have openness, where you have curious and cautious.
Right. Yeah. That describes like ocean openness, but there tend to be like there's like an opposite. There's like an antonym to each of those traits. Like here, opposite. I'm going to look it up online. But the idea is that each one has like an opposite, and it's very important to know that it's not like good, bad. Like openness is not good, whereas the other one is bad. It's just that it's just where you are. In fact, there are lots of advantages and disadvantages to being on either side.
I think that catalogar alguno como bueno o malo tampoco es bueno, porque finalmente creo que uno se niega a ciertos aspectos de uno o se le da más valor a ciertos estilos de personalidad.
Yeah, it also really depends on what you want. In like people say, oh, this is bad to have this personality, but it depends on what's important to you. So, for example, the best example is the agreeableness, disagreeableness. Now, if you say to someone, would you rather be agreeable or disagreeable? It's very likely that they're going to say, I would like to be considered as agreeable versus disagreeable. And I think that's generally true. Hello, thrown clothes.
Me tiraron una toalla acá.
And I think that's so you did that, by the way. I don't know who that was who threw that, but you shook your head in a very agreeable way, which is like you did it like very nicely and like where you didn't want to cause conflict with this person, right? But a disagreeable person is going to be cares much less about confrontation. Is much less worried about not. In Spanish, not cayéndose bien a otra persona. And so the reason why that's important, and why agreeableness, the trait tends to correlate to people who do not get raises, for example, in their workplace, whereas disagreeableness correlates very strongly to people who are able to get raises, and there's a very clear reason why. It's that because disagreeableness is kind of interlocked with assertiveness, right? So it's really important if you want anything in your life, it's important to be assertive and to say, this is what I want. And the less willing that you are to say that, and maybe you don't want to say it because you don't want to caerse mal a otra persona.
Conflicto.
Or causar conflicto. The less willing you are to say that, the less likely you are to receive that. Now, it doesn't mean that just because you say, I want this, somebody's going to give that to you, but it just makes it statistically way more likely that you will. So disagreeable people get raises much more often than people high in agreeableness trait. So you could see how like each one can have really favorable outcomes.
Sure. Volviendo al tema más atrás, como te contaba, en los colegios generalmente no se hace mucha prueba o no te ayudan mucho a ver en qué tú eres bueno, ver tus fortalezas, debilidades. Creo que Martin Seligman fue como el, no sé si sí, se puede llamar como el padre como de la psicología positiva, y él también enumera ciertos traits psicológicos en base a una serie de preguntas. Hay un test corto que son como unas 20 preguntas, y hay un test súper largo de 200 y se supone que es más certero. pero ahí tú logras ver también tus fortalezas y te permite, bueno, Martin Seligman también, donde es el padre de la psicología positiva, él fue como de los primeros como coaches en psicología positiva. Entonces, parte de lo que se habla en coaching es cómo trabajamos en base a tus fortalezas hacia donde quieres llegar. Hay otros tipos de coaching donde te deconstruyen y después tú reconstruyes. Y hay una variedad de técnicas y todo hoy en día.
By the way, before you continue, that reminds me of bright spots. Do you remember the concept of bright spots?
Bright spots son como los lugares donde habían como más talentos, por así decirlo.
Yeah, and then in terms of when you're coaching somebody or when you're instructing somebody, it's a technique that we use in cognitive, where the idea is that you want to leverage somebody's strengths, right, and work in base, like you're talking about with positive psychology, work in base of their strengths and not just focus on their weaknesses. Because people really tend to want to just look at the worst parts of themselves and say, okay, I need to improve this. I need to improve this. And they often forget that focusing on and leveraging the strengths that they actually have can get just as much value toward your objective as focusing on your weaknesses.
Sí.
Leveraging strength is important.
Sí, yo creo que, bueno, Gary Vee habla mucho de just focus on your strengths and don't worry much about the weaknesses, because overall you lose time actually growing. Because yo igual en lo personal creo que para ciertos puntos que uno tiene más débiles, al menos uno tiene que tener cierto nivel de competencia o debe ser claro en lo que quiere ser. Por ejemplo, un ejemplo como random, quizás yo en general soy como bueno para la parte de números, pero quizás no soy el mejor escritor de libros, entonces, y tampoco es mi focus ser escritor de libros, entonces no pierdo tiempo aprendiendo cómo escribir libros, ¿cachai? Ok, entonces parte de lo que te contaba, que en los colegios no se hace eso, entonces volviendo como al tema más educacional en Chile, cuando lo que hablábamos al principio, cuando sale esta beca de que a los puntajes sobre 700 se les otorgaría una beca para que puedan estudiar gratis, y creo que sobre 750, no recuerdo los números en este momento, si alguien nos quiere comentar por ahí, sería bacán. Pero si tú sacabas sobre estos puntajes, creo que incluso te podían pagar por estudiar pedagogía. Que eso ya sería el contrario a lo actual. Entonces, esto en su momento...
What I remember is that when you mentioned that in the previous podcast, you mentioned it with kind of a derisive tone where it seemed like you didn't think that was a great idea.
Sí, yo no creo que sea una buena idea. ¿Por qué? Por todo lo que hemos hablado de que cuando salió eso, en todo lo que hablamos de los colegios que no te ayudan mucho en tu desarrollo personal desde el punto de vista de, oye, ¿cuáles son tus fortalezas? ¿Cuáles no? Quiero aclarar al tiro que también la educación es algo que se parte en la casa, y quizás no todos tienen también esa oportunidad de tener padres que los potencien en lo que les gusta. Y también acá en Chile tenemos mucho esa mentalidad, o quizás en ese tiempo había mucho esa mentalidad de saca buenas notas, entra a estudiar, trabaja. Como que ese es como el marco general de la vida. Entonces, cuando sale esta beca, para gente que le va bien y todo, yo veo como, ya, por mencionar el punto bueno, ok, se supone que debiesen haber profesores más calificados o gente que es más calificada que estudie pedagogía, pero donde no te explican en qué eres bueno, en qué eres malo, y quizás no sabías qué estudiar, mi punto en contra, y es lo que más me hace ruido de eso, es que gente sin vocación entraría a estudiar pedagogía, y ya tenemos ese problema como quizás de siempre, quizás de repente profesores que no se preocupan tanto en las salas de clases, no quiero decir profesores pesados, ahí ya tú puedes elaborar más al respecto, pero no tendríamos, como, por así decirlo, profesores como de calidad. Ok, quizás hay gente capacitada, pero no sé cuáles son los números de deserción que quizás se tuvo con ese programa. En general,
¿Cuál es deserción?
Deserción, dropouts.
Ok, great. Deserción.
Deserción. Es como desertor.
Okay. Desertor is like a deserter.
Yes.
Deserción. Perfect. Desercer is to desert.
No sé si desercer existe, eso te lo tendría que confirmar, pero deserción es la gente, la gente que deserta una carrera. Entonces, por ejemplo, bueno, no sé que en mi universidad la tasa de deserción era alta en los primeros, o sigue siendo alta en los primeros años, pero con esto, que gente entra a estudiar gratis porque se les dio la oportunidad, no sé cómo habrá sido su tasa de deserción, porque quizás no tenían vocación, y yo siento que ese tipo de carreras donde tú estás manejando o quizás potenciando el futuro de generaciones, no puedes tener como a alguien que no se preocupe. Y esto
hold on, I'm stuck on the word vocación. So, vocación, can you define vocación, please? Because maybe I have a different idea of what vocación is.
For me, vocación or vocation. Do you know the concept? I don't know if this is something to be talked here. Ikigai. It's a Japanese concept. Esto lo podemos hablar en otro momento porque es súper largo y va relacionado con la mano.
Next podcast.
Next podcast.
¡Ting!
La vocación para mí es el hecho de que tú tengas un llamado. To have a calling to do something. So, if you don't have that, I think you won't be doing it because you love it. You will do it because, I don't know, you just have to do it or that you're stuck with. Is it a natural ability or is it something that you love? Is it something is it about you enjoying it, or is it like a don that's something that you're gifted with? I think it can have both. Regarding the vocational side, bueno, como allá alargando como la historia, cuando uno entra a la universidad, o al menos cuando yo entré a la universidad, uno pasa de un entorno en el que tienes que pedir permiso para ir al baño, pasas de un entorno al que, bueno, si querís, vais, así como es cosa tuya. Entonces, yo creo que ese periodo como que te permite harto de repente reflexionar lo que uno hace, lo que no. Y en algún momento, como quizás cualquier universitario, en algún momento uno se pierde y dice, oye, en Chile decimos, ¿para dónde va la micro? It's a saying that, what do I want to do? So, en mi estudio personal, cómo afrontar esa pregunta, tienes dos formas, según yo. You can...
¿Qué pregunta?
¿Qué quieres hacer? ¿O cuál es tu llamado?
Perfecto.
¿Cuál es tu vocación? Yo creo que tienes dos formas de verlo. La primera es tener una visualización de hacia dónde quieres ir y en base a lo que quizás ya haces o en lo que eres bueno, reverse engineer, hacer ingeniería a la reversa de, ok, ¿cómo llego allá? Y vas pensando hacia atrás todos los pasos y vas mapeando un proceso. Y la otra forma de verlo es saber en qué eres bueno y qué te gusta y hacer eso, porque hay placer, there's a joy when you do something that you're good at. Even though you don't know where you're going, you do know that you're doing something that you're good at and that brings you satisfaction.
Y hay una tercera opción muy Gary Vee de no estar muy seguro de lo que quieras.
Just try shit.
Y probar, taste, like he says, like probar muchas cosas. Y lo bueno de probar muchas cosas es que puedes destacar opciones.
Obvio.
Lo probé, no me gustó. Next. Lo probé, no me gustó. Next.
Sí, de hecho,
lo probé, me gustó esto, pero no esto. Y ahora me voy a enfocar en eso.
Yeah, Gary Vee says a lot of that, and I think that goes hand in hand with the second option that I said, do something that you're good at. But if you've never done anything, you don't know what you're good at. So you have to try shit. You know, you have to try.
Totally.
What you have to taste things. Maybe, I don't know. No sé, quizás yo nunca por así decir, he tatuado algo, pero sí me gusta dibujar y me gustan los tatuajes, entonces quizás puede haber algo por ahí, así por decir algo.
Well, this connects to what we talked about with control, the measurement of control that we use in cognitive, which is that if you want to grow, I mean, this is very axiomatic, very tried and true advice, right? But if you want to grow or you want to get stronger, you must be outside of your comfort zone, or there must be some stress happening. So if you want your muscles to grow, you've got to put them under physical stress, under physical pressure. And if you want if you want to grow in terms of maturity and wisdom, you've got to be uncomfortable, and you've got to fail, and you've got to feel pain, and then the search for not wanting to feel pain again or in the same way is wisdom.
Sure.
Is in growth. So it's really important. I mean, if we want to bring this back to learning English, or learning any language, it's just extraordinarily important that you learn how to live in the discomfort, and how to thrive in the discomfort. Not just aguantarlo, sino florecer, tener éxito.
Claro. Moverse dentro de esto.
Exactly.
So when we talked about que hablamos un poco de vocación y todo, retomando el tema, como que
sí, y tú dijiste otra cosa más que no escuché porque me estaba fijándome en vocación. Dijiste que una cosa es vocación y la segunda cosa no logré entenderlo.
Hablaba de que la vocación de hacer lo que quieres o hacer algo que te gusta. Entonces, con respecto a esta beca, yo sentía que quizás no íbamos a tener profesores con vocación de repente estudiando esto, y yo sentía que era algo súper importante, ya que vas a estar moldeando futuras generaciones. Is that it?
Right. Yeah.
What's your take on this subject?
Well, the reason I asked you about vocation and vocación is because I think most 17-year-olds don't know what they like and don't know themselves at all, or hardly at all.
I told you, and they never got some guidance on it.
Yeah, but even if they do have guidance, though, they're only in the very beginning point of self-discovery if that process actually happens in their life, right? And so they really don't know themselves, and therefore they may say that they know, but very few people really know who they are, what they want, and then go ahead and make at 17, and then go ahead and make that happen. They may think they know, but generally, or they may say that they know, but they don't know. So I think vocación for me is not so important. There are certain biological determiners that make us more likely to do this thing versus want to do this thing versus this thing, or be better at doing this thing than that thing. But apart from that, I think that it's a talent problem. It's a talent question. That the question is, how do you create an exceptional teacher? Right, and how do you do that replicably throughout a country? Finland had something to say about this. This was I think this was in the early 90s. They recognized that for their GDP, for all of the wealth they had as a country, their educational results were not very strong. So they made a bunch of changes. What I think and including that they gave teachers, or they made it I don't remember the details at this moment, but essentially what they did was they incentivized people who normally wouldn't become teachers, like people who graduated at the top of their classes. Now I remember. People who graduated at the top of their classes, they gave them incentives and scholarships to study pedagogy when they normally wouldn't study pedagogy. They paid them. They gave them a better pay and better salary incentives, and not only that, but they gave them incentives of staying in the career. So if you're in for 5 years, it goes up by this amount. If you're in for 10 years, it goes up by this amount. And then also they did other things with testing but I think the most important determiner is that they got talented people who normally would not have considered becoming a teacher to consider becoming a teacher. And why is that important? Well, it's not just in Chile, it's around the world, but it's particularly true in Chile.
Maybe that's what they were going after when they...
That is exactly what they were going after. I'm telling you, that's what they were doing, right? They in Chile, this is not, again, this is statistically true, but not true in all cases.
All right.
That people who study pedagogy tend to come from the lower half of their graduating class in terms of their grades, in terms of their notas, right?
All right.
And then those people who are generally who are not great students, right? They're not getting the best students generally. Mm-hmm. Those students are then going and studying pedagogy, in programs in which they literally say in pedagogy programs that the best way to become a great teacher is just to do it, right? So if they believe that the best way to become a teacher is is through experience and in the classroom, then what are people spending 4 years in university doing? If they don't really believe in the efficacy of teaching teachers how to teach in pedagogy and having them ready by the time they leave to teach well, then there's something very wrong happening. And then once they leave, they realize that the curriculum, which is heavily focused on social psychology, on childhood development, on kind of the ethics and of teaching. These are kind of like luxury concepts because they focus very little on the actual practical aspects of what happens inside of a classroom. For example, if you're a teacher and your class starts at 8 a.m. and it's 8:08 and the students have still not settled down and you have papers that you want to pass out to your students, how do you get them to settle down, pass out the papers, and get into your lesson as quickly as possible? And not just how do I know how to do that, but how do I practice that? Because in the moment, there's chaos. Things happen that you don't imagine. So let's practice that. Let's get feedback on how I do it, and let's go again and again and again. So there's very little practice involved in pedagogy, in university pedagogy. So then what happens is that teacher who again didn't love maybe or was not a great student in high school, then goes into pedagogy where they're not teaching. They're not really teaching them very well how to be a great teacher immediately. They go right into teaching, and this is why the first and second years desertion or dropout rates are so incredibly high, is because they start their classes and they immediately realize, wow, this is hard. I'm not prepared for this. And they don't get the results that they're hoping for, because most people who go into teaching with great ambitions and with wonderful ideals, like they really want to do something great, and that's wonderful, and that only sustains you for so long, because once you see that the results of your students you're not seeing those results, and they're certainly not happening quickly. You start to become desenamorado with the idea, and so the reason I think that was a great idea is because I got to tell you, like, we have to convince great students, people who are great students, and we have to convince talent who otherwise would become lawyers or aeronautical engineers, like you, or I'm sorry, aviation engineers, or who would become doctors. We have to convince talented people who otherwise would choose another career to consider going into the teaching field, and then we have to teach them really well and get them really prepared for day one of the classroom. And then after that, there are lots of other problems. Obviously, we have to pay that. They have to be paid well. And here's one more thing before I finish here. We have to as a society, incentivize not just through scholarships, but there have to be strong. Maybe scholarships are not the best incentive, but we have to strongly incentivize people to want to be teachers, because right now in Chile, it is quixotic, like the Quixote, or like overly idealistic, or maybe crazy. Mm-hmm. To want, if you are a talented student who could be an avian and really talented in math, who could be an aviation engineer, who could go into finance, who could go into one of these careers, to choose teaching. And why? Because not only because you're not paid particularly well, you're the politics involved with the parents, with the students, with your administration, with the government. Your students don't. There's a strong behavioral barrier. Most students do not want to be there in class, and you have to overcome that. It's really hard. You don't see results quickly. But not only for all those very practical reasons, but also because when you go to a party, right? Let's say that you're like you're very talented, you're great in math, and then you go to a party and you're in a carreta and you're like drinking and you're talking to someone.
Do?
Like,
what do you
hola,
do?
¿cómo estás? ¿Qué haces tú? And you're like, yo soy profesor. The look that you get, it's like the end of the conversation, essentially, right? Like, it's like, qué bueno. Oye, Paulo, and it just goes to somebody else, and that's because people we just view it as we have to change the stigma around wanting to become a teacher. It has to be something extraordinarily valued in society, which is what they achieved in Finland.
I think that's a really good point. And to wrap things up, I think that maybe the scholarship or what they're trying to do, it's a good cause. I mean, es algo que hacía sentido, es algo que se está usando afuera, pero siento que las bases en las cuales se sienta eso quizás no son las mejores. Es decir, está como el tema del estigma quizás de ser como profesor, quizás como hay un tema de paga. Un estudiante que, no sé, por ejemplo, le va muy, muy, muy bien, de repente quizás si no tiene esta vocación va a decir, oye, pero ¿por qué voy a ser profesor si siendo doctor quizás puedo ganar más? Entonces como que hay un tema como de por medio. También yo creo que está lo que hablamos en un principio, de que no hay esta guía o formación de repente durante el colegio para decir, oye, ¿en qué soy bueno, en qué no? Entonces yo creo que quizás ahora pensándolo de mejor forma está bien lo que intentaron hacer, pero yo creo que las bases pueden ser como más sólidas.
Perhaps. I like the attempt. It's really important to infuse talent and change this idea and get the people to want to be teachers and really produce the excellent teachers. That's the most important part of education.
Sure. I think that everything has been really interesting. Today I don't have that the same question that had last time, but did you get it though?
Once I saw the visual, I understood it.
I thought later when I was browsing some answers, there was this esta opción rebuscada de por lo mismo pero en el Polo Sur, y ya dije, no, eso es mucho y requiere matemática de por medio y algo que no vamos a abordar en este podcast. Así que muchas gracias, Jordan, por tu tiempo.
Muchas gracias, Joaquín.
Este podcast quizás no tuvo una línea como de contenido parejo, hablamos de todo un poco y como Acá en Chile está como el término nos fuimos por las ramas, que es decir...
Well, I would like to know from the people listening, what do you guys like? Do you like it to have a linear progression, or do you like this kind of it changing more frequently, and kind of going forward and then back and then around? What do you guys like?
I'll look up if we can maybe do this thing live over YouTube or over other platforms, so we can get some interactiveness over the stream. Muchas gracias, Jordan, por tu tiempo. Nos estamos viendo en otro capítulo. Hasta luego.
Chao.
Chao, chao.